Late night bar. Neon lights flicker in cold blue and purple. Deafening bass drowns out conversations and the clinking of dirty glasses. Single dad sits in a dark corner. Old jacket, drinking water. Waiting for his shift to end to pick up his daughter. Nearby, a girl is dangerously drunk, disoriented, barely standing. Two strangers close in, whispering plans. Predators circling helpless prey. The bartender looks away, pretends not to see the obvious danger. Suddenly, the dad looks up. His weary eyes become a soldier's. He stands, walks with lethal purpose into the middle of them. This move was about to silence the entire room forever. Calvin Brooks is not a man who seeks attention. At 43 years old, his life is a repetitive cycle of duty and devotion. He is a single father, a man whose world revolves around one person, his 9-year-old daughter, Lena. As Calvin sits in the dimly lit corner of the neon anchor bar, his mind isn't on the music or the drinks. He's thinking about Lena, who is currently tucked into bed at home, watched over by her grandmother. He checked his phone once more, a picture of Lena in her pajamas, smiling with a gap in her front teeth. That smile was his anchor in a world that had tried its best to sink him. Calvin works the late shift security for a corporate office building just down the street. It's a quiet job for a man who used to live a very loud life. He wears a faded utility jacket, his boots are worn at the heels, and his hands are calloused. He looks like any other blue-collar worker trying to make ends meet. He is waiting here because the late-night bus doesn't run for another 40 minutes, and the bar is the only place warm enough to sit without being hassled. The smell of stale beer and cheap perfume fills the air, but Calvin barely notices. He is a master of compartmentalization. He orders a glass of water. He doesn't touch alcohol, not since the accident 5 years ago that took his wife, Sarah. Since that day, Calvin has been a shadow of his former self. He was once a high-level special security training officer, a man who taught others how to neutralize threats before they even started. He was the man you called when things went south. But after Sarah died in a hit-and-run while he was away on a high-stakes mission, the adrenaline turned to ash in his mouth. He walked away from the agencies, the gadgets, and the danger. He wanted peace. He wanted to be a safe harbor for Lena. He avoids trouble. He keeps his head down. He avoids eye contact, blending into the shadows like a ghost. But tonight, the atmosphere in the bar feels heavy. The air is thick with a tension that Calvin can feel in his marrow. He's trained to sense it, the change in barometric pressure before a storm. A few yards away, near the flickering jukebox playing a melancholic rock ballad, is a girl named Maya. She's 22, dressed for a night out that clearly went wrong. She had just gone through a devastating breakup and thought a few drinks would numb the pain. She was wrong. Now the world is spinning in dizzying circles. Maya is clutching the edge of a high-top table, her knuckles white, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looks like she's about to faint, her head lolling back as she tries to focus on the exit sign. Standing far too close to her are two men. They aren't regulars. They look slick, expensive, and predatory, wearing designer jeans and watches that cost more than Calvin's truck. They are leaning in, their shadows stretching over her like wolves over a wounded lamb. One of them, a man with a jagged scar on his chin and cold, dead eyes, whispers something in her ear that makes her flinch. He reaches out and places a heavy, unwelcome hand on her lower back, his fingers digging into her skin. "Come on, sweetheart," the man says, his voice cutting through the thumping bass. "You need a ride home. We've got a car right outside, very comfortable, very private." Maya tries to pull away, but her legs are like jelly. She mumbles something, a no that is too weak to be heard over the laughter of a nearby group. She looks around the room, her eyes glazed and pleading, searching for a lifeline in a sea of indifference. She looks at the bartender, a man named Rick who has seen it all. Rick is busy polishing a glass, his eyes fixed on the floor, deliberately ignoring the drama unfolding 10 feet away. He knows these men have money. He saw the $100 bill they dropped earlier. He doesn't want the paperwork. He doesn't want the fight. He tells himself it's none of his business. Calvin observes this through the reflection in his water glass. He feels the old familiar tension rising in his chest, a phantom limb of the soldier he used to be, His pulse, usually slow and steady, begins to pick up a rhythm he hasn't felt in years. He knows exactly what is happening. He's seen the Predator play 1,000 times in a dozen different countries. He knows what happens to girls like Maya when they get into cars with men like them. They become statistics. They become the missing person flyers that fade under the sun. Calvin closes his eyes for a brief second. He thinks of Lena. He thinks of the promise he made to her and to himself to never get involved in violence again. He promised to be home every morning to make her pancakes. But then he looks at Maya's trembling hands. He sees Sarah's face in the girl's desperation. He realizes that if Sarah had met a man like him that night 5 years ago, she might still be here. The man with the scar grips Maya's arm tighter, his nails sinking in. He begins pulling her toward the exit. She stumbles, her heels skidding on the sticky floor, nearly hitting the floor. The second man laughs, a cold metallic sound that grates against Calvin's ears. Calvin Brooks sets his glass down. The sound of the plastic hitting the wood is quiet, but in his mind it's the sound of a heavy vault door locking shut. He stands up. He is taller than he looks when he's sitting, his posture suddenly rigid and commanding. His shoulders square, and the exhaustion of the night shift seems to evaporate. The tired father is gone. The specialist is back. The distance between the corner booth and the jukebox is only 15 feet, but it feels like a mile. Calvin walks with a measured, silent gait, the predator walk he used to teach. He doesn't rush. He doesn't shout. He simply moves through the crowded bar like a knife through silk. As the two men reach the heavy oak door with Maya in tow, Calvin steps into their path. He doesn't say a word at first. He just places himself directly between Maya and the exit, blocking the light from the street. He stands like a stone wall, unmoving, unbreakable. His presence is so sudden and so absolute that the men are forced to stop. "She's not going anywhere with you," Calvin says. His voice is calm, devoid of anger or fear. It isn't a scream, it's a statement of fact. It's the kind of voice that stops a heart, the kind that commandos use when they have the high ground. The man with the scar stops. He looks Calvin up and down, seeing only an old jacket, gray-flecked hair, and a tired face. He sneers, a look of pure arrogance crossing his features. "Who the hell are you? Her grandpa? Get out of the way, old man, before you get hurt. This doesn't concern you." Calvin doesn't blink. His eyes are fixed on the man's throat, a soft target. "I'm the person telling you to let her go. She's had too much to drink. She's not in a state to make decisions. Leave her here and walk away. This is your only warning. Don't make me say it again." The second man, shorter but built like a bull with thick tattooed arms, steps forward, trying to use his bulk to intimidate Calvin. "You've got a lot of nerve, pal. We're her friends. We've been with her all night. We're taking care of her. Now move, or I'll move you." "You aren't her friends," Calvin replies, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a low growl. He doesn't look at the man's face anymore. He's watching their hands. Friends don't grip someone's arm hard enough to leave bruises. Friends don't lead someone out to a car when they can barely speak. Let her go. The shorter man reaches out to shove Calvin's chest, a standard, clumsy move to test a target's balance. He expects the old man to stumble back, to apologize and flee. But Calvin doesn't fall. He doesn't even sway. It's like the man tried to shove a mountain. Instead, as the man's hand touches the rough fabric of Calvin's jacket, Calvin's hand moves like a blur of motion. In one swift, mechanical motion, Calvin catches the man's wrist. He doesn't punch. He doesn't strike. He simply applies a specific, agonizing pressure to a nerve cluster near the ulna. The man's face turns pale instantly. He gasps, his knees buckling slightly as a bolt of lightning, fast pain shoots up his arm. He tries to pull his hand back, but it's like it's caught in a steel vise. The music is still thumping, but the people nearby have finally noticed the lack of movement at the door. They sense the shift in the air, the sudden drop in temperature. The neon anchor has seen its share of bar fights, drunken swings, broken chairs, and clumsy brawls. But this is different. This isn't a fight. This is a surgical intervention. There is a terrifying lack of wasted energy in Calvin's movements. The man with the scar sees his partner struggling, his confusion turning into a deep, angry red. "You're dead," he snarls. He lets go of Maya, who slumped against the doorframe, and reaches into his back pocket. It's a fast, practiced motion, the motion of someone reaching for a folding knife or a knuckle duster. "Don't," Calvin says, his voice now cold as a winter morning. The man ignores him. He lunges forward, swinging a heavy, uncoordinated fist toward Calvin's jaw, while his other hand fumbles with whatever is in his pocket. Maya, caught in the middle, lets out a soft, terrified whimper, her eyes finally focusing enough to see the violence about to erupt. Calvin realizes he can't just defend himself, he has to protect her. With his free hand, he gently but firmly pushes Maya toward the bar counter, using her own momentum to guide her out of the line of fire. She slides onto a stool, blinking in confusion. The bartender finally drops the glass he was polishing. It shatters on the floor, a sharp, crystalline explosion that punctuates the tension like a gunshot. The security guard for the bar, a young man named Tyler, who usually just sits by the door checking IDs, starts moving toward them. His hand is on his radio, but his feet are heavy. He looks terrified. He sees Calvin holding one man by the wrist while the other is mid-swing. He sees the look on Calvin's face, a look of absolute focused neutrality. Time seems to slow down for Calvin. In his mind, the bar disappears. He sees the angle of the punch. He sees the lack of balance in the aggressor's feet. He sees the path to safety. For a split second, he thinks about Lena's smile. He thinks about the world he wants her to grow up in, a world where someone stands up when the lights get low. He knows that if he fails here, he fails her. "Stay back," Tyler the guard shouts, but he doesn't intervene yet. He's frozen by the look in Calvin's eyes. It's not the look of a brawler, it's the look of a man who has seen the worst of the world and decided quite simply that he's had enough. Calvin lets go of the first man's wrist and prepares for the impact. He doesn't fear the pain. He only fears the failure of his duty. If you believe that sometimes one person standing up is enough to change everything, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. The man with the scar swings. It's a wild, desperate overhand right, fueled by ego and adrenaline. To a normal person, it would be a knockout blow that could break a jaw. To Calvin, it's amateur hour. Calvin doesn't step back. He doesn't flinch. He steps in. He pivots on his left foot. A micro adjustment that lets the punch whistle past his ear by a mere inch. He can feel the wind of the fist as it passes. As the man's momentum carries him forward, Calvin uses the man's own weight against him. He grabs the man's shoulder and sleeve, executing a perfect, controlled takedown. There is no loud crash. There is only a dull, sickening thud as the man hits the floor, pinned instantly under Calvin's knee. It was a movement of pure physics, graceful, terrifying, and final. The second man, whose wrist Calvin had just released, tries to recover. He sees his friend on the ground and lets out a roar of frustration. He tries to kick Calvin in the ribs while he's down. Without even looking, as if he had eyes in the back of his head, Calvin catches the boot midair. He twists his hips, and the second man is spun around like a top, losing his balance and crashing into a nearby table. Drinks fly. Chairs slide across the floor. But then Calvin stops. He isn't hitting them. He isn't kicking them. He is simply holding them in a position where they cannot move without breaking their own bones. He is a master of leverage and human anatomy. He knows exactly where to press to ensure compliance without causing permanent damage, unless he chooses to. The entire bar goes dead silent. Someone reaches over and kills the jukebox. The sudden lack of noise is jarring, more frightening than the music. The neon lights continue to flicker, casting a blue and purple strobe effect over the scene. Calvin looks like a statue in the center of a storm. Calvin is crouched on the floor, holding the man with the scar in a professional restraint hold. The man is gasping, his face pressed against the sticky, beer-soaked floorboards. He's cursing, but his voice is thin and weak. The other man is slumped against a table, clutching his twisted arm, his eyes wide with a fear he hasn't felt in years. He's too afraid to move again. He realizes he's not fighting a man. He's fighting a machine. Maya is leaning against the bar, her eyes wide, the alcohol slowly being burned away by the surge of cortisol. The shock has cleared her head just enough to realize how close she came to a nightmare. She stares at Calvin, her breath hitched in her throat. The bar security guard, Tyler, finally arrives at the scene, but he stops 3 feet away. He doesn't pull his baton. He doesn't shout. He looks at Calvin's posture, the way his back is straight, the way his hands are positioned. He looks like a man who could kill everyone in the room, but has chosen peace instead. "Who are you?" Tyler whispers, his voice trembling. An older man sitting at the bar, a veteran named Sam who had been watching the whole time from behind a glass of whiskey, stands up. He recognizes the moves. He recognizes the cold, calculated efficiency of a Tier 1 operator. "That's not just a guy," Sam says, his voice carrying through the absolute silence. "That's a professional. Look at his stance. He's wearing an old jacket and khakis, but that's an operator's frame. You don't learn that at the local gym." Calvin doesn't respond to the praise. He doesn't look around for applause. He doesn't even look at the crowd. He keeps his eyes on the men on the floor, his breathing as steady as if he were sitting in his corner booth. "Call the police," Calvin says to Rick the bartender. "Now, tell them you have 2 suspects in custody for attempted kidnapping and assault." Rick, shaking so hard he almost drops the phone, finally dials 911. For the next 5 minutes, the bar remains a frozen tableau. It's a freeze moment that will be talked about for years in this neighborhood. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. They just stare at the single dad from the corner. They see the man they ignored all night. The man they thought was nobody, just another weary face in a weary city. They see the strength hidden in the shadows. One of the men on the floor tries to curse again, a desperate attempt to regain some dignity. Calvin applies a tiny surgical bit more pressure to his shoulder. "Shh," Calvin whispers, his voice almost tender. "You've done enough talking for one night. Save it for the judge." Outside, the distant rhythmic wail of sirens begins to grow louder, echoing off the brick buildings. The blue and red lights start to dance against the frosted windows of the bar, mingling with the neon. When the police burst through the door, they expect a bloody brawl. They expect broken bottles, screaming patrons, and chaos. Instead, they find a calm man in an old jacket, holding 2 known predators on the floor like they were unruly children. The bar patrons are standing back, watching in a silence that feels like a prayer. The officers move in with their handcuffs. They recognize the 2 men on the floor immediately. Their eyes widen. These weren't just creeps. They were men wanted for a string of drugging and robbery incidents across 3 counties. They were the suitcase predators, and they had been the targets of a multi-agency investigation for months. As the handcuffs click shut, a sound of finality, one of the officers looks at Calvin. He looks at the way Calvin stands up, dusting off his worn jacket with a simple, humble movement. The officer's eyes widen. He recognizes Calvin from the old training academy photos, the legend who had trained the instructors. "Brooks?" the officer asks, stunned, his voice full of disbelief. "Calvin Brooks? Is that really you? We heard you. We heard you left the country." Calvin simply nods once, his face unreadable. "Just a bystander, officer. Just a dad trying to get home before the sun comes up." The police begin taking formal statements, but the energy in the neon anchor has completely changed. The fear has evaporated, replaced by a strange kind of reverence. People are whispering, pointing at Calvin, who is standing off to the side looking at his watch. The officer who recognized Calvin, a man named Miller, pulls him aside into a quiet booth. "Miller," Calvin says, recognizing the younger man, "you've put on weight. And you've grown a beard, Cal," Miller says with a weak smile. "We haven't seen you in years. After the accident, after Sarah, we thought you disappeared. We looked for you, you know. The department wanted to bring you back as a consultant." Calvin shakes his head. "I have a daughter now, Miller. She's my only mission. I don't do the other thing anymore." "Well, you just did it," Miller says, nodding toward the suspects being led out to the cruisers. "You know who these 2 are? We've been trying to catch them in the act for 6 months. They're smart, they're fast, and they're dangerous. You handled them like they were toddlers. You just saved that girl's life, Cal, and probably half a dozen others down the line." Calvin doesn't smile. He doesn't take the win. He just looks over at Maya. She's sitting on a bar stool now, wrapped in a shock blanket provided by the paramedics. Her face is pale, but she's drinking a glass of orange juice. She's crying softly, not out of pain, but out of the sheer, terrifying realization of the precipice she was standing on. Rick, the bartender, approaches Maya. He looks small now, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his own cowardice. "I'm so sorry," he mutters, his voice cracking. "I saw them. I should have said something. I was scared." Maya doesn't look at him. She doesn't have the energy for anger. She looks at Calvin. Calvin walks over to her. He doesn't say anything at first. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small laminated photo of Lena, the one he carries everywhere. He shows it to Maya. "I have a daughter," Calvin says gently, his voice like a warm blanket. "She's 9. Her name is Lena. If she were in your shoes 10 years from Geo, I'd want someone to be sitting in that corner for her. I'd want someone to stand up. I'm just glad I was here tonight." Maya reaches out and touches the edge of the photo. Her hand is finally steady. The tremor's gone. "Thank you," she whispers, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. I know it. They were going to—" She can't finish the sentence, but she doesn't have to. Calvin takes off his old jacket. It's not a designer brand, and it's seen better days, but it's thick and warm. He drapes over Maya's shoulders. "It's over now. The police will take you home. You're safe." Calvin turns back to Miller. "I've given my statement to your partner. My bus is coming in 10 minutes. Can I go? I promised my daughter I'd be there when she wakes up. It's Pancake Friday." The officers look at each other. Under any other circumstances, they'd keep a witness for hours. But they know who Calvin Brooks is. They know he's a man whose word is more solid than the pavement outside. "Go ahead, Cal," Miller says, patting him on the shoulder. "We'll handle the paperwork, and thank you for everything. The city missed you tonight." As Calvin walks toward the door, the owner of the bar, who had rushed down after hearing the news, stops him. He offers Calvin a thick stack of bills, a reward, or perhaps an attempt to buy off his own guilt. Calvin pushes the hand away without a second thought. "Keep it," Calvin says, his voice firm. "Just hire a better guard. And tell your staff to look up from the glasses once in a while. Don't wait for a stranger to do what's right." A few people in the bar start to clap. It starts with Sam, the veteran, then Tyler, the guard, then the whole room. It's a standing ovation for the man in the corner, but Calvin doesn't turn back. He doesn't wave. He steps out into the cool pre-dawn air. The neon lights of the neon anchor are behind him now. The street is quiet, the pavement damp with a light mist. He walks to the bus stop. He checks his watch. 6:15 a.m. He's right on time. The bus arrives with a hiss of pneumatic brakes and the smell of diesel. Calvin takes a seat in the back, leaning his head against the cool glass of the window. He watches the city begin to wake up, the street lights flickering off, the early morning joggers, the garbage trucks making their rounds. He feels the ache in his muscles, a dull reminder of the man he used to be. But he also feels a deep, quiet peace that he hasn't felt since before Sarah died. He reaches his small, modest apartment just as the clock hits 6:45 a.m. Inside, it's quiet. The air smells like home, cinnamon, lavender, and old books. He walks past his mother-in-law, who is asleep on the sofa, and tiptoes into Lena's room. She is sprawled out across her bed, clutching a tattered teddy bear named Barnaby. She looks so peaceful, so untouched by the shadows he just fought. Calvin sits on the edge of her bed for a long time. He watches the steady rise and fall of her chest. He realizes that being a father isn't just about providing food, clothes, and a roof. It's about being the kind of man who makes the world a little safer, a little kinder, even when nobody's watching. It's about being the guardian in the shadows. A few days later, the story hits the local news. Unknown hero thwarts major crime ring at local bar. The report mentions a man in a brown jacket who disappeared before the cameras arrived. There are no photos of Calvin, no interviews, no viral social media posts with his face on them. He likes it that way. Maya goes on to finish her degree. She never forgets the man in the corner. She tells the story to her friends, not as a story of a fight, but as a story of a guardian. She learns to be more careful, but she also learns that there is still profound good in the world, hidden in the most ordinary places. She eventually starts a foundation for victims of assault, naming the first center the Anchor. Calvin continues his job as a security guard at the office building. He still sits in the corner of the bar sometimes on Thursday nights, waiting for his bus. He still orders water. People walk past him every day, seeing only a tired, middle-aged man with gray in his beard. They have no idea that they are walking past a lion. They have no idea that they are safe because men like him still exist. Because true courage doesn't always roar. It doesn't always wear a cape or seek the spotlight. Sometimes true courage is just a single dad, sitting quietly in the back of a room, ready to stand up when everyone else stays seated. He is Calvin Brooks. He is a father. And that is the only title he ever truly wanted. If you believe that courage is standing up for those who can't stand for themselves, subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment. What would you have done if you were in that bar?